Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, I'd like to welcome you to day 2 of our workshop on changing the culture of data management and sharing, hashtag data sharing. Next slide. We had a very rich and engaging discussion yesterday on many topics, and so we wanted to start with a brief overview of some of the main points. Obviously, there was much more covered than I could ever do justice to in these opening remarks. But it was really quite clear from listening to all of the participants yesterday in the discussion, including audience participation, that the idea that there are many benefits to data sharing is quite clear. And Patty Brennan's talk about the impact during the pandemic on open science and open sharing of high quality data really brought the message home, I think, in a very real way. And this allowed us to shift the arguments about data sharing from perhaps negative impacts to the possibilities and benefits. We all recognize that this is going to involve a shift in scientific culture. That issue came up over and over again, but there was a phrase that was used, which was we should elevate the data. That is, make data a primary product, a first-class product of our research. And that includes all data, including that from failed or negative experiments. This is going to require flexibility. The data landscape of biomedicine is vast, and the policy does have flexibility built in, which is very good. And we saw some examples of that yesterday. And another key takeaway is that it's really quite clear that responsible data sharing is a partnership across the research ecosystem. There are many stakeholders, from the participants in research studies to the researchers, to the institutions, the libraries, funding organizations, and scientific societies. And we really want to invite the community to participate in this effort. And we saw a lot of good examples of that yesterday. Next slide. So just to give a quick overview of some of the things that were shared in the session. Our first session was an introduction that provided perspectives on data sharing across different data types. And again, it was a very rich discussion. I'm not going to read all of these because to keep us on time, but we had a nice panel discussion about considering questions like what would successful data sharing look like? And it's really, again, quite clear that if the approach is successful, that we're trying to inculcate that it will be built into the research process from the get-go. So this is just something that people will do as a matter of course, good data management, and that good data management leads to good data sharing. There was an increasing emphasis on making sure that this new policy changes of the NIH is not just viewed as a box-ticking exercise that says, I have to do this, and therefore I'm going to just tick this box and put minimal effort, but that it should really be action-oriented and innovative and really focus on data reuse. And if we're successful, then we'll see things like careers being started with other people's data and companies and other things. So the impact on the ecosystem is going to be extremely large. Next slide. The first session was called Strategies for Managing and Sharing Data. And there was a lot of emphasis on big data, but we had examples in biomedicine that there's a variety of data, and this variety problem is extremely important. Again, the emphasis on involving the community early in any decisions that are being made about how one wants to manage and share the data. Emphasis on meeting researchers where they live, making sure that there are tools that work within their laboratory contexts. Emphasis on innovative architectures that allow us to visit data and federate data rather than having to constantly download. And as always, when data sharing is discussed, an emphasis on research repositories and the challenges they face, but also the opportunities that they provide. Next slide. Session 2 was entitled Monitoring and Evaluating Data Management and Sharing. And this had a very rich discussion on data citation. There have been a lot of stakeholders who have been implementing practices so that one can cite data sets just like you would cite research articles as a means of tracking their use and starting to develop a credit system around them. It was acknowledged that the system is still not quite ready for prime time, but that shouldn't stop us from doing the things that we know we are going to need to do for when the infrastructure is finally going to be ready. So repositories can support data citation, researchers can practice it by including references to data sets they used in the reference list, and publishers should continue to implement it. And there are things that can be done to help push that along, like increasing use of DOIs. It was really interesting to see how much data we have on data sharing. So we had a lot of good statistics that were presented that show the current state, that provide us with a really nice baseline of where we'll be able to go in the future. So that even though there are a small number of papers right now that make data available, it is true that these tend to have a larger impact and a more international scope to them. So it's good to know that we can start on this very strong analytic space. And again, an emphasis on training opportunities for making sure that we know how to develop data management plans at the institutional, departmental, and PI level. Next slide. Session 3 was entitled Encouraging Uptake of Data Sharing in the Scientific Community. And this was a very wide-ranging panel discussion that focused on things like data quality and reuse of data. Again, this emphasis of supporting practice, of adoption over time. So we know that this is going to take a lot of culture change. Therefore, the emphasis on can we define structures that will allow for incremental sharing, allowing researchers to more effectively share data within their own groups and across their collaborating labs first, and then be able to share with the wider community. So it gives us sort of a path of going from never sharing data to making it widely open. And then while this is happening, we can establish norms for sharing data and meaningful carrots and sticks. Emphasis again on data management plans and how those can be used effectively. So there was a nice quote, if we plan our work, then we can work our plan by capturing all of the relevant details about how data are shared. Another emphasis again on formal, relevant, structured, and mentor training opportunities for PIs and grad students, and make sure that we provide some good examples for people to follow. So take it from the abstract to something that's concrete. We need to cultivate subject matter data stewards, the idea that this needs to be a profession of professional data stewardship, which is going on in the EU and somewhat in the United States as well. Always clear rewards for sharing, but there was a lot of emphasis on oversight and compliance checking that will be needed as well for this policy to be effective. Next slide. And so now I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Dr. Richard Nakamura, who can talk a little bit about key issues still to resolve.
Thank you. So these are topics that we thought were important for particularly the Office of Science Policy at NIH to focus on and ensure that they move further towards resolution. There's a lot of uncertainty in the field about the areas of funding costs, resources, incentives, how to make this a career value, training modules, tools to ease the collection of data in a format that is useful to others, how to deal with discovery science, creation of citation standards out of the mixed bag that we currently have, what to do about privacy and IP data that makes some data sets less usable, tests for data reusability, and other best practices. We think that there also needs to be some visibility of PI sharing practices, and that is a system that needs to be developed. Next slide. So today, we will cover value and cost of managing and sharing data, shaping the culture of data sharing, reducing barriers and increasing incentives, and finally, implementing the NIH policy. Are we ready for 2023? Next. I'd like to remind you that the workshop will be recorded and materials, videos will be uploaded to the website within a couple of weeks after the event. We've received a lot of questions about when this will happen. The Slido platform beneath the webcast video can be used for entering comments and questions. Please include your name and affiliation. We remind speakers and moderators that this is a fully packed schedule and to please stay on time. There will be a brief workshop survey distributed later today by email. Take a few minutes and share your thoughts. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Christine Borgman, Distinguished Research Professor in Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. Christine.